The Indian independence movement encompassed activities and ideas aiming to end the East India Company rule and the British Raj in the Indian subcontinent. The movement spanned a total of 190 years. The very first organized militant movements were in Bengal, but they later took movement in the then newly formed Indian National Congress, with prominent moderate leaders seeking only the basic right to appear for Indian civil service examinations, as well as more rights, economic in nature, for the people of the soil. The early part of the 20th century saw a more radical approach towards political self-rule proposed by leaders such as the Lal Pal and Aurobindo Ghosh. The last stages of the self-rule struggle from the 1920s onwards saw Congress adopt Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi's policy of non-violence and civil resistance, Muhammad Ali Jinnah's constitutional struggle for the rights of minorities in India, and several other campaigns. Activists Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and Bhagat Singh preached armed revolution to achieve self-rule. Poets and writers such as Rabindranath Tagore, Subramania Bharathi, Allama Iqbal, Josh Malabhabadi, Muhammad Ali Juha, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay and Qazi Nazrul Islam used literature, poetry and speech as a tool for political awareness. Feminists such as Sarojini Naidu and Begum Rokeya promoted the emancipation of Indian women and the participation in national politics. Babasaheb Ambedkar championed the cause of the disadvantaged sections of Indian society within the larger self-rule movement. The period of the Second World War saw the peak of the campaigns by the Quit India movement led by Mahatma Gandhi and the Indian National Army movement led by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. The Indian self-rule movement was a mass-based movement that encompassed various sections of society. It also underwent a process of constant ideological evolution. Although the basic ideology of the movement was anti-colonial, it was supported by a vision of independent capitalist economic development coupled with a secular, democratic, republican, and civil libertarian political structure. After the 1930s, the movement took on a strong socialist orientation, due to the increasing influence of left-wing elements in the Congress as well as the rise and growth of the Communist Party of India. The All India Muslim League was formed in 1906 as a separate Muslim party which later in 1940 called for separate state of Pakistan. The work of these various movements led ultimately to the Indian Independence Act 1947, which ended the suzerainty in India and the creation of Pakistan. India remained a dominion of the Crown until the 26th of January 1950, when the Constitution of India came into force, establishing the Republic of India. Pakistan was a dominion until 1956, when it adopted its first republican constitution. In 1971, East Pakistan declared independence as the People's Republic of Bangladesh. Background: early British colonialism in India. European traders first reached Indian shores with the arrival of the Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama in 1498 AD, at the port of Calicut, in search of the lucrative spice trade. Just over a century later, the Dutch and English established trading outposts on the subcontinent, with the first English trading post set up at Surat in 1617. Over the course of the 17th and early 19th centuries, the British defeated the Portuguese and Dutch militarily, but remained in conflict with the French, who had by then sought to establish themselves in the subcontinent. The decline of the Mughal Empire in the first half of the 18th century provided the British with the opportunity to seize a firm foothold in Indian politics. After the Battle of Plassey in 1757, AD, during which the East India Company's Indian Army under Robert Clive defeated Siraj-ud-Daulah, the Nawab of Bengal. The company established itself as a major player in Indian affairs, and soon afterwards gained administrative rights over the regions of Bengal, Bihar and Midnapur, part of Orissa. Following the Battle of Buxar in 1764, after the defeat of Tipu Sultan, most of South India came either under the company's direct rule, or under its indirect political control as part of princely state in a subsidiary alliance. The company subsequently gained control of regions ruled by the Maratha Empire, after defeating them in a series of wars. Punjab was annexed in 1849, after the defeat of the Sikh armies in the First and Second Anglo-Sikh Wars. In 1835, English was made the medium of instruction in India's schools, and many Indians increasingly disliked British rule. With the British now dominating most of the subcontinent, many Britishers increasingly disregarded local customs and mistreated Indians. Early rebellion. Pulitheva was one of the earliest opponents of the British rule in India. He was in conflict with the Nawab of Arcot, who was supported by the British. Theva's prominent exploits were his confrontations with Maradhan Yagam, who later rebelled against the British in the late 1750s and early 1760s. Nilkatamsval, the present Tirunelveli district of Tamil Nadu state of India, was the headquarters of Pulitheva, the first chieftain in India to resist the British. He was the principal architect of the coalition of the Palayagas organized against the Nawab. The Nawab acknowledged his victory by presenting him with a gold plate and sword. Kerala Varma Pashasi Raja was one of the earliest freedom fighters in India. He was the prince regent of the princely state of Kottayur in North Malabar, near Kannur, India between 1774 and 1805. He fought a guerrilla war with tribal people from Wynad supporting him. He was caught by the British and his fort was razed to the ground. Veerapandiya Kattabomman was an 18th-century Palayakaran chieftain from Panchalankurichi in Tamil Nadu, India, who waged a war against the British East India Company. He was captured by the British and hanged in 1799 CE. Kattabomman refused to accept the sovereignty of British East India Company, and fought against them. Deer and Chinnamalai was a Kongu chieftain and Palayakara from Tamil Nadu who fought against the British East India Company. After Kattabomman and Tipu Sultan's deaths, Chinnamalai sought the help of Marathas and Maruthu Pandya to attack the British at Coimbatore in 1800. British forces managed to stop the armies of the Allies, and hence Chinnamalai was forced to attack Coimbatore on his own. His army was defeated and he escaped from the British forces. Chinnamalai engaged in guerrilla warfare and defeated the British in battles at Koveri in 1801, Odanalai in 1802 and Arakalya in 1804. In September 1804, the king of Gudda, Kalinga, was deprived of the traditional rites of Jagannath Temple, which was a serious shock to the king and the people of Odisha. Consequently, in October 1804, a group of armed Paksh attacked the British at Pipili. This event alarmed the British force. J. Rajguru, the chief of army of Kalinga, requested all the kings of the state to join hands for a common cause against the British. Rajguru was killed on 6 December 1806. After Rajguru's death, Bakshi Jagabandhu commanded an armed rebellion against the British East India Company's rule in Odisha, which is known as Pak Rebellion. The Vellore Sepoy Mutiny at the garrison of the Vellore fort in July 1806 comprised 4 companies of British infantry from H.M. 69th Regiment of Foot and 3 battalions of Madras infantry. 2 hours after midnight on the 10th of July, the sepoys in the fort shot down the European sentries and killed 14 of their own officers and 115 men of the 69th Regiment. most of the latter as they slept in the barracks. Among those killed was Colonel St. John Fancourt, the commander of the fort. The rebels seized control by dawn, and raised the flag of the Mysore kingdom over the fort. Tipu's second son Fateh Hyder was declared king. However, a British officer escaped and alerted the garrison in Arcot. 9 hours after the outbreak of the mutiny, a relief force comprising the British 19th Light Dragoons, Gallipoli guns and a squadron of Madras cavalry rode from Arcot to Vellore, covering 16 miles in about 2 hours. It was led by Sir Rollo Gillespie, one of the most capable and energetic officers in India at the time, who reportedly left Arcot within a quarter of an hour of the alarm being raised. Gillespie dashed ahead of the main force with a single troop of about 20 men. Arriving at Vellore, Gillespie found the surviving Europeans, about 60 men of the 69th, commanded by NCOs and 2 assistant surgeons, still holding part of the ramparts but out of ammunition. Unable to gain entry through the defended gate, Gillespie climbed the wall with the aid of a rope and a sergeant's sash which was lowered to him, and to gain time, led the 69th in a bayonet charge along the ramparts. When the rest of the 19th arrived, Gillespie had them below the gates with the Gallipoli guns, and made a second charge with the 69th to clear a space inside the gate to permit the cavalry to deploy. The 19th and the Madras cavalry then charged and slaughtered any sepoy who stood in the way. About 100 sepoys who had sought refuge in the palace were brought out, and by Gillespie's order, placed against a wall and shot dead. John Blackiston, the engineer who had blown in the gates, recalled, "Even this appalling sight I could look upon, I may almost say, with composure. It was an act of summary justice, and in every respect a most proper one. Yet, at this distance of time, I find it a difficult matter to approve the deed, or to account for the feeling under which I then viewed it. The harsh retribution meted out to the sepoys snuffed out the unrest at a stroke, and provided the history of the British in India with one of its true epics, for as Gillespie admitted, with a delay of even 5 minutes all would have been lost." In all, nearly 350 of the rebels were killed, and another 350 wounded before the fighting had stopped. The Rebellion of 1857. The Indian Rebellion of 1857 was a large-scale rebellion in northern and central India against the British East India Company's rule. It was suppressed and the British government took control of the company. The conditions of service in the company's army and cantonments increasingly came into conflict with the religious beliefs and prejudices of the sepoys. The predominance of members from the upper castes in the army, perceived loss of caste due to overseas travel, and rumors of secret designs of the government to convert them to Christianity led to deep discontentment among the sepoys. The sepoys were also disillusioned by the low salaries and the racial discrimination practiced by British officers in matters of promotion and privileges. The indifference of the British towards leading native Indian rulers such as the Mughals and ex-Peshwas and the annexation of Oudh were political factors triggering dissent amongst Indians. The Marquis of Dalhousie's policy of annexation, the doctrine of lapse applied by the British, and the projected removal of the descendants of the great Mughal from their ancestral palace at Red Fort to the Qutb Minar also angered some people. The final spark was provided by the rumoured use of tallow and lard in the newly introduced pattern 1853 Enfield rifle cartridges. Soldiers had to bite the cartridges with their teeth before loading them into the rifles, and the reported presence of cow and pig fat was religiously offensive to both Hindu and Muslim soldiers. Mangal Pandey, a 29-year-old sepoy, was believed to be responsible for inspiring the Indian sepoys to rise against the British. Mangal Pandey revolted against his army regiment for protection of cow, considered sacred by Hindus. In the first week of May 1857, he killed a higher officer in his regiment at Bagpur for the introduction of the offensive rule. He was captured and was sentenced to death when the British took back control over the regiment. On the 10th of May 1857, the sepoys at Meerut broke rank and turned on the commanding officers, killing some of them. They then reached Delhi on the 11th of May, set the company's toll house afire, and marched into the Red Fort, where they asked the Mughal Emperor, Bahadur Shah II, to become the leader and reclaim his throne. The emperor was reluctant at first but eventually agreed and was proclaimed Shahenshah-e-Hindustan by the rebels. The rebels also murdered much of the European, Eurasian, and Christian population of the city. Revolts broke out in other parts of Oudh and the northwestern provinces as well, where civil rebellion followed the mutinies, leading to popular uprisings. The British were initially caught off guard and were thus slow to react, but eventually responded with force. The lack of effective organization among the rebels, coupled with the military superiority of the British, brought a rapid end to the rebellion. The British fought the main army of the rebels near Delhi, and after prolonged fighting and a siege, defeated them and retook the city on the 20th of September 1857. Subsequently, revolts in other centres were also crushed. The last significant battle was fought in Gwalior on 17 June 1858, during which Rani Lakshmi Bai was killed. Sporadic fighting and guerrilla warfare, led by Tatu Tope, continued until spring 1859, but most of the rebels were eventually subdued. The Indian Rebellion of 1857 was a major turning point in the history of modern India. While affirming the military and political power of the British, it led to significant change in how India was to be controlled by them. Under the Government of India Act 1858, the company was deprived of its involvement in ruling India, with its territory being transferred to the direct authority of the British government. At the apex of the new system was a cabinet minister, the Secretary of State for India, who was to be formally advised by a statutory council. The Governor-General of India was made responsible to him, while he in turn was responsible to the government. In a royal proclamation made to the people of India, Queen Victoria promised equal opportunity of public service under British law, and also pledged to respect the rights of the native princes. The British stopped the policy of seizing land from the princes, decreed religious tolerance and began to admit Indians into the civil service. However, they also increased the number of British soldiers in relation to native Indian ones, and only allowed British soldiers to handle artillery. Bahadur Shah was exiled to Rangoon, Burma, where he died in 1862. In 1876, in a controversial move, Prime Minister Disraeli acceded to the Queen's request and passed legislation to give Queen Victoria the additional title of Empress of India. Liberals in Britain objected that the title was foreign to British traditions. Rise of organised movements. The decades following the rebellion were a period of growing political awareness, manifestation of Indian public opinion and emergence of Indian leadership at both national and provincial levels. Dadabhai Naoroji formed the East India Association in 1867 and Surendranath Banerjee founded the Indian National Association in 1876. Inspired by a suggestion made by A. Hume, a retired British civil servant, 73 Indian delegates met in Bombay in 1885 and founded the Indian National Congress. They were mostly members of the upwardly mobile and successful Western-educated provincial elites, engaged in professions such as law, teaching and journalism. At its inception, the Congress had no well-defined ideology and commanded few of the resources essential to a political organization. Instead, it functioned more as a debating society that met annually to express its loyalty to the British Raj and passed numerous resolutions on less controversial issues such as civil rights or opportunities in government. These resolutions were submitted to the Viceroy's government and occasionally to the British Parliament, but the Congress's early gains were slight. Despite its claim to represent all India, the Congress voiced the interests of urban elites. The number of participants from other social and economic backgrounds remained negligible. The influence of socio-religious groups such as Arya Samaj and Brahmo Samaj became evident in pioneering reforms of Indian society. The work of men like Swami Vivekananda, Ramakrishna Paramahansa, Sri Aurobindo, V.O. Chidambaram Pillai, Subramanya Bharathi, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, Rabindranath Tagore and Dadabhai Naoroji, as well as women such as the Scots-Irish sister Nivedita, spread the passion for rejuvenation and freedom. The rediscovery of India's indigenous history by several European and Indian scholars also fed into the rise of nationalism among Indians. Rise of Indian nationalism. By 1900, although the Congress had emerged as an all-India political organization, its achievement was undermined by its singular failure to attract Muslims, who felt that the representation in government service was inadequate. Attacks by Hindu reformers against religious conversion, cow slaughter, and the preservation of Urdu in Arabic script deepened the concerns of minority status and denial of rights if the Congress alone were to represent the people of India. Sir Syed Ahmed Khan launched a movement for Muslim regeneration that culminated in the founding in 1875 of the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College at Aligarh, Uttar Pradesh. Its objective was to educate wealthy students by emphasizing the compatibility of Islam with modern Western knowledge. The diversity among India's Muslims, however, made it impossible to bring about uniform cultural and intellectual regeneration. The nationalistic sentiments among Congress members led to the movement to be represented in the bodies of government, to have a say in the legislation and administration of India. Congressmen saw themselves as loyalists but wanted an active role in governing their own country, albeit as part of the empire. This trend was personified by Dadabhai Naoroji, who went as far as contesting, successfully, an election to the British House of Commons, becoming its first Indian member. Bal Gangadhar Tilak was the first Indian nationalist to embrace Swaraj as the destiny of the nation. Tilak deeply opposed the then British education system that ignored and defamed India's culture, history and values. He resented the denial of freedom of expression for nationalists, and the lack of any voice or role for ordinary Indians in the affairs of the nation. For these reasons, he considered Swaraj as the natural and only solution. His popular sentence, "Swaraj is my birthright, and I shall have it," became the source of inspiration for Indians. In 1907, the Congress was split into two factions. The Radicals, led by Tilak, advocated civil agitation and direct revolution to overthrow the British Empire and the abandonment of all things British. The Moderates, led by leaders like Dadabhai Naoroji and Gopal Krishna Gokhale, on the other hand, wanted reform within the framework of British rule. Tilak was backed by rising public leaders like Bipin Chandra Pal and Lala Lajpat Ray, who held the same point of view. Under them, India's three great states, Maharashtra, Bengal and Punjab, shaped the demand of the people and India's nationalism. Gokhale criticized Tilak for encouraging acts of violence and disorder, but the Congress of 1906 did not have public membership, and thus Tilak and his supporters were forced to leave the party. But with Tilak's arrest, all hopes for an Indian offensive were stalled. The Congress lost credit with the people. A Muslim deputation met with the Viceroy, Minto, seeking concessions from the impending constitutional reforms, including special considerations in government service and electorates. The British recognized some of the Muslim League's petitions by increasing the number of elective officers reserved for Muslims in the Indian Councils Act 1909. The Muslim League insisted on its separateness from the Hindu-dominated Congress, as the voice of a nation within a nation. Partition of Bengal, 1905. In July 1905, Lord Curzon, the Viceroy and Governor-General, ordered the partition of the province of Bengal supposedly for improvements in administrative efficiency in the huge and populous region. It also had justifications due to increasing conflicts between Muslims and dominant Hindu regimes in Bengal. However, the Indians viewed the partition as an attempt by the British to disrupt the growing national movement in Bengal and divide the Hindus and Muslims of the region. The Bengali Hindu intelligentsia exerted considerable influence on local and national politics. The partition outraged Bengalis. Not only had the government failed to consult Indian public opinion, but the action appeared to reflect the British resolve to divide and rule. Widespread agitation ensued in the streets and in the press, and the Congress advocated boycotting British products under the banner of Swadeshi. Hindus showed unity by tying Rakhi on each other's wrists and observing a Ramadan. During this time, Bengali Hindu nationalists began writing virulent newspaper articles and were charged with sedition. Brahma Bandivadhyaya, a Hindu newspaper editor who helped Tagore establish his school at Shantiniketan, was imprisoned and the first martyr to die in British custody in the 20th century struggle for self-rule. All India Muslim League. The All India Muslim League was founded by the All India Mohammedan Educational Conference at Dhaka in 1906, in the context of the circumstances that were generated over the partition of Bengal in 1905. Being a political party to secure the interests of the Muslim diaspora in British India, the Muslim League played a decisive role during the 1940s in the Indian self-rule movement and developed into the driving force behind the creation of Pakistan in the Indian subcontinent. But when Muslim League passed Pakistan resolution based on two-nation theory of Jinnah, nationalist leaders like Maulana Azad and others stood against it. All India Jamhur Muslim League was formed parallel to Muslim League with Raja of Mahmudabad as its president and Dr. Mafur Ahmad Ajazi its general secretary. In 1916, Muhammad Ali Jinnah joined the Indian National Congress, which was the largest Indian political organization. Like most of the Congress at the time, Jinnah did not favor outright self-rule, considering British influences on education, law, culture and industry as beneficial to India. Jinnah became a member of the 60-member Imperial Legislative Council. The council had no real power or authority, and included a large number of unelected pro-Raj loyalists and Europeans. Nevertheless, Jinnah was instrumental in the passing of the Child Marriages Restraint Act, the legitimization of the Muslim WAQF, and was appointed to the Santust Committee, which helped establish the Indian Military Academy at Dehradun. During the First World War, Jinnah joined other Indian moderates in supporting the British war effort, hoping that Indians would be rewarded with political freedoms.